You want to finish what you started? You came to the right place. Them girls that you came with, you might have to part with. Depending on how this thing shakes. Wauwatosa, Kenosha, is in the house.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The New Look, and a special one at that. For those who didn't catch the last episode, a little context on today's episode. Last fall, I had the idea for doing a podcast interviewing retiring members of Congress. I wanted to interview all the Democrats and Republicans that were retiring to learn more about their careers and their views on the institution. I thought this would be unique and interesting, and had kind of resisted doing a podcast for a long time because there's a lot of members doing it. And, I think on some level it continues a trend that isn't that helpful, which is members thinking of themselves primarily as media voices as opposed to legislators and people that have to do oversight of the executive branch. But nonetheless, I thought this could be interesting and different, and a space for a substantial conversation about Congress. But then coronavirus happened, and it disrupted the plan I originally had. But I still wanted to bring the handful of conversations I had last year to you. And with that, today we will hear from Representative Will Hurd, first elected to the House in 2014. He represents the 23rd Congressional District of Texas. Will Hurd served in the CIA prior to running for Congress. He has an incredible background. He is not only a friend, but someone that I really admire and I look up to in Congress, particularly on national security and cybersecurity issues. And I was very shocked that he was leaving, and sad, and I will miss his leadership, but I hope we can capture some of his thoughts, and when aliens land 20 years from now, they can dig up this podcast in my backyard, my digital backyard, and they'll think, man, if only Will Hurd had stayed in Congress, the Republic would have survived and we never would have invaded the planet Earth. But that's a conversation for another day. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Representative Will Hurd.
To the tens of listeners that we have out there, we are honored to be joined by William F. Hurd. Actually, I don't know what your middle name is.
It starts with a B. Let's see if you can guess it. It rhymes with a waterfowl, and it starts with B.
Rhymes with a waterfowl. Buck. Is that right?
Actually, that would be awesome if it was.
Yeah.
That's mallard. I have to say, the waterfowl is mallard. My middle name is Ballard. Yeah.
Ballard. What is the origin of Ballard?
It's my dad's best friend when he was growing up in school.
That is a fun fact about Will Hurd, the pride of San Antonio, Texas. Will, tell us who you are, where you're from, how deep are your roots in San Antonio?
Sure.
What's the sort of superhero origin story of Will Hurd?
On August 19, 1977, the skies opened and the baby came to Earth on a rainbow. No. Look, I was born and raised in San Antonio. San Antonio is literally my home. My parents moved there from Los Angeles. They met in L.A. My dad's originally from Texas. My mom's from Indiana. And it wasn't in vogue for an interracial couple. My dad's black, my mom's white, to be living in South Texas.
Where'd they meet and how they... That's anytime you talk about racial issues on this podcast, buzzer goes off in the background. That's a vote thing, everybody. Sorry.
So my parents met in L.A. My dad was a salesman, and he was selling notions like zippers, threads, fabric, stuff like that. And my mom was a buyer. Wow. And my mom always asked the salespeople really tough questions about the product because she sewed the seamstress and stuff. And these male salesmen didn't like getting all the questions, so they gave it to a new guy, my dad, and told him to handle that account. And 2 years later, they married. And so the San Antonio's home, went to Texas A&M University, degrees in computer science. I was walking across campus and saw 2 signs to take journalism classes in Mexico City for $425. And I had $450 in my bank account. So I go to Mexico and fell in love being overseas, seeing things I only read about in books, and that caused me to add international studies as a minor. In my first class, I had a CIA tough guy tell the most amazing stories about the CIA, and that began my interest. And so when I graduated from A&M, I went straight into CIA actually too. Best job on the planet. I was a
You were also student body president at A&M.
I was student vice president A&M during.
So would it be fair to say you had a kind of a political interest way back then, or just more?
What was interesting, the whole reason I got involved in student politics is my senior year in high school, I thought I was going to go to Stanford. I had a mentor, a woman named Dr. Jill Marshall, who got me excited about robotics and technology. She went to Stanford, so she was my mentor and someone I looked up, so I wanted to go to Stanford. And got accepted, got money to go, and I applied to A&M as a backup. And I had a counselor at my high school who kept hounding me to be like, just go tour campus, just go tour campus. And I did, and fell in love with A&M, and made a decision right then and there to go to Aggie Land and not Stanford. And one of the guys I met was a dude who was the student body vice president. And one of the things he said was, when you're a freshman, get involved in the student body president campaign. And I did, and I ended up running this guy's campaign. And he became one of my best friends. And that became, like, I just did it to get involved. And then I stayed involved in campus activities, and I ran our student union, which was a programming organization. And I said, there were some problems I thought needed to be fixed, and I didn't see any people that were running to fix them, so I ran. And so it was, but what's funny is A&M's 45,000 students. I got elected. I got 17,000 votes in my first selection, which is more than a lot of people get in primaries.
That's
right. And so it was probably my first exposure. Right. But then when I was in the CIA, I was a case officer, so I'm the dude in the back alleys at 4 o'clock in the morning recruiting spies and stealing secrets. And in addition to doing that in places like India and Pakistan and Afghanistan, I had to brief members of Congress. And unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to brief people like Mac Thornberry, right? Or Mike Gallagher. He was still in diapers when you.
Pretty much, yeah.
And
Liam and my mother's house.
And so some of the members I had to brief, I was pretty shocked by the caliber of our elected officials. And my mama said he was part of the problem, part of the solution. And so I left the job I was good at, moved back to my hometown, San Antonio, ran for Congress, and lost a runoff by 700 votes.
So was that basically right after you got out of
Literally,
the
I
agency?
left. Yeah, I separated from the agency on August 19, 2009.
Yeah.
August 20th, I sent an email to 20,000 of my closest friends, being like, "Hey, guess what? I'm running for Congress. I need you to send $25." Oh, and by the way, I actually work in the CIA.
That's right.
Yeah, so that was some
Well,
awkward conversations.
Interesting. Did you have to get? I mean, such a dramatic shift going from operating undercover, covertly, in crazy places around the world to being very public.
Yeah.
I mean, did you have to get permission?
Oh yeah,
from
it's the separation process is quite complicated because there were ongoing operations that I was intimately involved in that were still happening, and so we had to make sure that things, the security around those operations were tight. It was not an easy process, but ultimately the agency was fantastic because they knew that I wasn't leaving because I had an axe to grind. Right? I loved the organization, had a great career, an exciting future, but they saw that I was going to be able to help the intelligence community in a different way, and so everybody was super supportive and working to make sure I could do that. The hardest transition for me was the only time I had ever said those 3 letters, the CIA, in 9.5 years, was when you finalize a recruitment, right? The person who is giving you secrets, you want to make sure it's very clear. They know exactly who they're working for. So I didn't say those 3 letters much. And then it became something I said like 50 times a day, which was awkward. Even now, I've now been out longer than I was in. And it's still weird. It's still weird saying those 3 little letters.
How many years total?
9.5.
9.5. So so you were right. I mean, if I'm analyzing it from a military perspective, after you pass the 10-year mark, usually it's like, well, I might as well do 20. How was that a thought? How closely did you consider making a career out of the agency?
Sure. I thought I was going to be in the agency for my entire career because I loved the job, and it probably would have been a different calculation if I had been in 11.5 years.
Yeah.
Had I been married with kids, right? I think these were all different calculations, but when the time came, so that the 23rd District of Texas has switched parties every election since 2006. And it was a swing seat that in 2010 there was going to be when a new president comes in his midterm years, he generally loses seats, and so there was a lot of external factors that made sense. I always say the sun, the rain, the moon, the stars, and the mountains were all aligned for me to run in 2010 in a seat that represented my hometown. So a lot of those calculations go into at the moment. But had one situation been different, we may never have met and wouldn't be talking.
That would be a sad, alternative Earth 2 to live on that we never met. Okay, so here you grow up kind of as this interesting hybrid of, a jock nerd, right? I mean, you're a computer science geek on the one hand. You play basketball in high school, which is fitting because when Wild Bill Donovan recruited for the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA, he said he wanted to recruit PhDs who could win a bar fight. So you're sort of that kind of model. Will's also he's like tall and intimidating too. You had a very fruitful and successful career as a collector in the agency, and now you run for Congress. It doesn't work out the first time. I imagine you must have felt like, oh my gosh. Was there a moment where you're like, what the heck did I do? And I don't want to do this again? Because it's brutal to run for Congress.
So it's brutal, but also, nobody thought I had a chance. Nobody believed I could pull this out. And there was 5 of us in the first primary. And I won by 900 votes against someone who was a self-funder, against someone who had done it before. And I made a strategic and a tactical error in the runoff. And so I take full responsibility for that loss. But when you lose by 700 votes, right, you get that close. And look, none of the political apparatus supported me. The media didn't think I had a chance. And so it really was a ragtag group of folks and friends that I knew and random folks from across the district that put together a movement. And I felt at the time, I felt super disappointed that I let all those people down, right? But then I realized we did something that came closer than something people didn't think. And the guy that beat me in the runoff went on to beat the incumbent. And so I thought he was going to be in the seat for a long time. And I didn't think I was going to run again. And so, it was interesting. I didn't know what Plan B was. People would ask me, well, if you don't win, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't have a Plan B. And they're like, well, that's what you're supposed to say. But no, I literally did not have a Plan B. And I asked 72 people the same question. I was 32 at the time. I said, if you were 32, what would you do? And if time and money wasn't an issue, what would you do? And I thought I was getting like the next idea for Instagram or something. And I got 71 terrible responses. The 72nd person was like the father of one of my best friends I know since I was 13. And he does do something meaningful and hard. And I thought that was crummy advice as well. But then when you start looking back, all the things I love doing. And so that gave me an opportunity to join a boutique consulting firm, a bunch of former CIA officers, became a partner in that firm. And then we started a cybersecurity company where we basically broke into banks, stole their money, and we showed them how we did it. And so it was a great opportunity. And then when the incumbent in the 23rd lost, the Republican lost, I called up my crew. I said, I got one in me, one left, if y'all got another one in you. And they all said yes, and so we decided to throw a hat in the ring again.
So you throw your hat in the ring. After a career as a digital bank robber, after killing Bin Laden single-handedly, you throw your hat in the ring again, you win.
That was a joke. I did not single-handedly kill Bin Laden. That's
you have to be a Navy SEAL to kill. Yeah. And then you have to write a book about it afterwards. So you win in 2010. You've gone from interacting with members of Congress and coming away with a negative opinion. Now you have a chance to sort of work on issues, bring your intelligence experience. This whole interview series is about kind of Congress as an institution. But maybe as a bridge to that, I'd like to kind of start with 2 policy areas. One is your background in intelligence and then how your experience in working on that from a legislative perspective. But then I would like to circle back to cybersecurity. So you're on the Intelligence Committee now. You weren't always on the Intelligence Committee, but just kind of what's been your experience as a legislator now looking back at the intelligence community from Article 1 as opposed to being an operator in Article
Sure. So one of the things that people don't realize in the CIA, specifically in the National Clandestine Service that I was in, we are the collectors of last resort. If you can't get a piece of information any other way, that's when you go to the clandestine service of the CIA. It's the hardest, it's the most expensive kind of intelligence that you can get. And the CIA is not there to advocate for policy. It is to collect information to inform policymakers. And so we go through great lengths not to suggest a particular policy. We're not policy prescriptive. Now, being on the other side, where that's what you actually do, it was a mindset change, a shift. However, understanding how all the ints, when I say ints, I mean intelligences, from signals intelligence to imagery intelligence to human intelligence. Knowing how that stuff is produced gives you a better understanding of the information that you're reading. Right? It helps you ask better questions to get to a particular policy. You're able to identify intelligence gaps in questions that we should ask that would be able to inform policy. So I was able to be a more sophisticated consumer of intelligence and information. But the thing that I was shocked by when I got here, two things that I was shocked by when I first got to Congress: how warm relations were between members and members. Right? Mm-hmm. So this is the year was 2015, is after the 2014 election, and we were partisan back then, but the member-to-member relations were exceptionally warm. Two, I was shocked by the number of senior folks that actually came to a freshman and sought my advice and opinion on particular matters because they knew my background. And so those were two things that I was surprised by, and it applied both to Republicans and Democrats. And so I was able to help people understand the why behind some of the things that they were reading, and look, when you chase Al Qaeda across the world, the same principles and theories apply to ISIS, right? They're kind of their tool, their tactics, techniques, and procedures may evolve, and so having a knowledge of those things helped me better understand what tools we have in the toolkit.
And then how do you think? I mean, it seems like we've been very successful in physically killing and destroying a lot of these terrorist groups. Now we're sort of emerging from 18 years of prioritizing counterterrorism, and the new shiny object is great power competition with China. Do you think that's the right overall shift in our foreign policy? Whether the threat from Salafi jihadism right now as we focus more on China?
No, look, great questions. You're a fantastic interviewer. Just for the
my second one ever.
We
need a title for this too.
I would have thought you'd been doing this for forever, man. So it's like, move over.
Face for radio.
Yeah. So I can answer that question multiple ways.
Well, this is the problem. You have so many interesting things you have expertise on. I don't know where to focus.
This is great. So let's start with terrorism. I've asked a number of practitioners in the counterterrorism space, what day do we celebrate? What day are we going to celebrate in the global war on terrorism, and that our children will be able to mark on the calendar and be like, this is the day the global war on terrorism is over? Again, got a bunch of crummy answers. The best answer I got was from Ambassador Hank Hunton, actually a former CIA officer, my business partner after the CIA, one of the first guys I worked for in the CIA. He was responsible for the Counterterrorism Center Special Operations Division, which after 9/11 prosecuted the war in Afghanistan. He said, terrorism is like influenza. You're never going to get rid of it, but you can inoculate communities from it. And so this notion that there is a zero-sum game within terrorism is not going to work because it's a tactic that a group uses based on ideology. So if you don't address the ideology, you're not going to see this stuff stop, right? And so how you counter that ideology has evolved. When I was chasing Al Qaeda, they would do night letters, like literally write letters and put it on people's doorsteps, right? Now ISIS is leveraging social media to touch people 6,000 miles away, right? But how you counter that ideology is the same. In the U.S., we call it CDE, counter environmental extremism. So you have to address the underlying ideology, right? So that's one step. Now, when it comes to intelligence, the skill sets necessary to understand the plans and intentions of terrorist groups is very different from the skill set necessary to understand the plans and intentions of the 2PLA Chinese military, or what Vladimir Putin is trying to do. And because of the focus on the CT fight over the last 18 years, you have seen some of those skills and going after those great powers atrophy a bit. And so we can and we should be doing both, right? And I also think relying more on intelligence prevents the intelligence and diplomacy prevents having to use our military. Ambassador Ryan Crocker, who I think is one of the best things the Foreign Service has produced since George C. Marshall, always says if you have more wingtips and pumps on the ground, right, meaning more diplomats and intelligence officers, you can prevent boots on the ground, right, meaning bringing in the military. And I completely agree with that, but oftentimes we don't give enough power and responsibility to our diplomats, because they can help deal with this issue.
Yeah. So you were in the business of human intelligence. For those who don't know what that is, you're basically collecting information from human sources. I was a military human guy, so far less sexy than you. But we used to say the problem with humans is that it involves humans. Things lie, they're difficult to deal with. It's an area of fire weapon. We now have a lot of digital weapons at our disposal. We have the ability to sort of peer inside, buildings digitally that we may not have had 20 years ago. Do you feel like we are headed in the right direction when it comes to cyber warfare, getting the talent we need, the process that the way in which the federal government is organized around cybersecurity? Because you have expertise in both the human side and also the tech side of this.
So talent, future cyber warriors, I think that is a piece that we don't have enough, right? Because the volume we need is outpace what we are able to produce right now is outpacing our need. Is not outpacing our need, right? So let's take the federal government for example. There's 15,000 positions in, I call it the .gov space, outside the military and intelligence services that need cyber professionals, right, to defend the digital infrastructure of Social Security Administration, of OPM, places like that. And so we're not producing enough out of our schools and universities. If I just look at Texas, 2 years ago in Texas, there was about 35,000 positions that required some kind of coding or cyber skills. Texas only produced 2,700 computer scientists that year, right? So we need to be producing more. And then when it comes to the strategy on how we defend, the technological change we're going to see in the next 30 years is going to make the last 30 years look insignificant. And so how do we take advantage of technology before it ultimately takes advantage of us? And when it comes to cyber war, if you establish a red line, you're able to get right up to that red line, literally 1 pixel away. And that's like you can cross that red line, right? So a lot of times, national security practitioners want to use the framework of conventional weapons, right? Nuclear weapons conventions and how you stop nuclear weapons, right? You can't apply that because once a cyber weapon gets out in the open, everybody has access to it and everybody can use it, right? If we launch a nuclear missile and someone gets a piece of it out of the ocean, you can't make a nuclear missile out of that, right? And so that's what's different about cyber tools, and all of this is going to be artificial intelligence, right? So the future of cybersecurity is good AI versus bad AI, and we need to make sure that we're defining things like the ethics around how to use artificial intelligence. Because if we don't do it and we don't do it with our partners, guess who is? The Chinese. And they don't care about privacy, right? They don't have civil liberties, and they're using these tools right now to put millions of ethnic minorities, the Uyghurs, in concentration camps. and they're perfecting this tool against them. They're going to use it against the rest of the population, and then they're going to export it to other authoritarian regimes. So I know I'm all over the map here.
No,
but
that's well said.
These are some of the issues we have.
I mean, we could spend a whole podcast talking about cybersecurity, but I think from my vantage point, I mean, you're in your third term,
Sure,
right?
correct.
You have emerged in a short period of time as the thought leader on cybersecurity, on intelligence. I would also say border security,
Sure.
given you have the largest border district, correct?
Correct.
Was that this is a final question before you transition to kind of Congress as an institution? Was that a conscious effort? And I ask that because I think one of the hardest things in this job for any member is just to focus, right? You quoted George Marshall. His advice to George Kennedy was avoid trivia, right? You can't do everything or you will do nothing. How have you managed sort of the day-to-day chaos of Congress, and how have you prioritized and focused in your time?
So everybody in my office knows we do two things. Be a leader on national security and the gold standard when it comes to constituent relations, right? And so and national security is fairly broad, but these are the areas that we focus on because that's my background, that's my expertise, that's what I understand. Right? And so we've tried to focus on those things. And when I came in, we were in the majority, and so I was the chairman of a subcommittee on IT, and so a lot of my day was spent focusing on these issues of technology just because that was my background. And I ran a subcommittee, and so narrow your focus, right? And I think we've been successful at that because also it's those things that I enjoy and those things that I love, and it has a nexus back home, right? I have 5 military bases in and around my district. I have 820 miles of the border, more than anybody else, right? These were issues that trade is important, so that means a relationship with Mexico. But yeah, it was a conscious effort and focus to spend time on those issues.
So, all right, let's transition to Congress. So the whole point of this is I'm trying to interview as many members that are retiring as possible. We're losing a lot of really good members for a variety of reasons. But it's part of this broader question of whether Congress, as an institution, Congress as the first branch of government, is broken. So maybe we'll start there. I can ask that as broadly as that. Is Congress broken from your perspective? If so, how? Or what has frustrated you most about this institution in your 3 terms here?
So, is it broken? Whatever 2 adjectives below broken is that's what I would say. I would say this institution is, right. It was designed not to be efficient. It was designed ultimately to be fairly cumbersome, so that you couldn't just do things and make it happen quickly, right? That's part of the checks and balances inherent in the system. Now, I would say, and I don't trash the institution. Now, I ran because I was pretty shocked by the caliber of our elected officials. And as I'm leaving, people want me to criticize the institution. Now, I can say I've been effective. 16 pieces of legislation signed into law. Under a Republican president, under a Democratic president, under a Republican speaker.
That's a lot, by the way.
That's a
For
lot.
people that don't know, it's hard to get legislation in law.
Right, and that's under a Republican speaker and a Democratic speaker, right? And that's more than a lot of people that have been here for 20 or 30 years. And so you can still be effective in this institution. But the thing that is off, I believe, are the incentive structures. And when I look, I wish more. Let's start with how people get here. If more districts look like mine, 50-50, right? If every Republican in my district votes for me, I still lose. I have to get independents. I have to get Democrats. Hillary Clinton won my district by 4 points. Beto O'Rourke beat Ted Cruz in my district by 5 points in 2018. Hillary Clinton in 16 and Beto in 18. Right? And so I get rewarded by solving problems. Now, a lot of people, and let's take the 2020 election, let's say there's 40 seats that are in play, right? That can go either way. That number 19 years ago was like 75. 10 years before that, it was like 115. 10 years before that, it was like 150, right? And so if right now, Republicans and Democrats across the state have designed districts that are overwhelmingly Republican or Democrat. So 80% of the people up here do not have to talk to people of the other party because it's going to have no impact on their electoral success.
Yeah.
So that is the first broken incentive structure.
They're acting rationally. The problem is they're not. It's not like they're bad people. It's just they're responding to incentives that are pushing them
Absolutely.
in bizarre directions.
They're talking to 3% of their population.
Interesting.
Right? So let's look at a primary, Republican or Democrat, anywhere between 25 and 60,000 people. Right? Out of 800,000, that's a fraction. I think it's like 2.5%. Right? And then you think about the people within that. That's for everybody coming out to vote. So divide that by half of and that's the folks that you're literally talking to. Right? So that's one piece. Second piece is the centralization of power within the party structure here in Congress. In the talks that I've had with people 15 years ago, a chairman of a committee or a chairwoman of a committee would tell the speaker or the majority leader to screw off. Right? The chairman of the Appropriations Committee literally ran, and the subcommittee chair, they were called cardinals for a reason, because they ultimately had power to make things happen. So what they would do was they would take care of the people on their subcommittee, Republicans and Democrats, right? And so you had this distribution of power and influence that allowed things to get done. Now, every major piece of legislation generally gets negotiated by the speaker and the minority leader, right? And so they are influenced by the same pressures within the party. So those are two things that have happened that have messed up the incentive structure of this place.
Can I unpack the second one a little bit in that? I think people don't understand it. If you're like a young new member of Congress, you get here, you're ambitious, you want to do a lot of stuff, you want to fix problems. The centralization of power at the top really does demoralize you. In other words, if you have no ability to influence a bill and it's served up to you at the last second on a platter, I mean, it's pretty frustrating, right? I mean, I think we see that often with appropriations bills. I want, and I think this is you're correctly diagnosing something, which is there. In some ways, the committee chairman used to be too powerful. The Watergate babies come in, they make a lot of changes, but they overcorrect it, and now everything is centralized at the top. I wonder. I mean, are there any fixes to that sort of second problem that seem obvious to you? I mean, how would we devolve power back down to the members?
Look, it starts by the leaders devolving power to those members, right?
Yeah.
I would say in this process, in the current appropriations process, Chairwoman Nita Lowry had probably way more influence than previous appropriations chair people from getting this deal ultimately done. So that's a good thing. And then the next step would be for the next appropriation process is to have the subcommittee chairman. She devolves some of that power to them.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I don't think it actually requires a new rule or legislation. It just requires those people in those positions to push that power down.
I'll confess to you, and I know you're on the Appropriations Committee, so you might have a different view. I had never understood the division between Appropriation Committee, the Appropriation Committee, and the authorizing committees. As I understand it, dates back to the days of like John Quincy Adams in Congress. But to me, it's like you want the same thing, right? You just want members on committees to understand those issues and thereby do effective oversight of the executive branch. I don't know, that's the skill set that would allow you to do that is the same for authorizing, i.e. telling those agencies what they're allowed to do, and appropriating, giving them money to do the things you're authorizing. So I have proposed collapsing the Appropriations Committee and authorizing committees. I know that's very contentious, but do you have any thoughts about that basic division?
Sure, I can make an argument for either side, right?
Yeah.
And so let me play contrarian here to you. So I think one of the most important powers of Congress is our oversight function. Being able to hold hearings, bring the executive branch up here, ask them questions. That is shining a light on activity. I think that's one of the most important one of the most important pieces. So to be able to do that, right, which is the authorizing committees really play the bulk of that. To then do a oversight of the business elements of those agencies, right? How are they spending those dollars? How much they actually need? And then to actually go into the fights and the battles of agreeing on getting Republicans and Democrats to agree on a dollar amount. I think each one of those things is a ton of work, and concentrating that in only one set of people, I think would be difficult having seen it. But philosophically, right, it would make sense. Now, a step that we should take is within the executive branch. You have procurement people, the procurement people that are purchasing goods and services, whether it's office supplies or planes, are different from the people using those goods and services, right? And so how do we get into a situation where you're paying $75 for a broom, right? Because the person using that is not the person that's responsible for purchasing it. And so if you improve that power, right, and you merge that within these executive branches, then that could streamline the ability to do oversight. Because when you do oversight of the program and the effectiveness of the program, that is the same person who is making decisions on the dollar amounts, right? And I think that is a piece that is important. And it's funny, I'm the IT procurement guy in Congress, right? Nobody's ever held a parade for IT procurement, right? But when you
We should, that'd be fun.
I'll be the Grand Marshal. But when you tell people the federal government spends $90 billion, that's with a B, on purchasing IT goods and services, and 80% of that is on legacy systems, stuff that you and I would consider to be super old, it's outrageous, right? And the way you improve the effectiveness of the government is you streamline, its ability to bring things into the government, right? And you'll be able to provide better digital-facing services. Why do you have to go to the post office to renew your passport, right? You should be able to take a picture on your phone and mail that puppy in, right?
Yeah.
So these are some of the things that, while these conversations of how government works seems, super wonky, but in the end, it's about how do you provide a better service to the people that we represent and to the people that are paying for this space.
Well, and we have a lot of colleagues who, with all due respect, aren't as young as you, don't have your background in IT, who might not be able to even identify that these systems are old, outdated legacy systems, which I think gets back to the first problem you diagnosed, which is the incentives through which people get here. Are there any obvious fixes to that? I mean, I think you kind of alluded to the idea that gerrymandering has become a problem. Some people have endorsed nonpartisan redistricting. Is there anything kind of upstream from the institution itself, a fix that you've stumbled across that makes sense? It's hard. I mean,
all the solutions are hard, but ultimately, can you figure out how in every state to draw lines like seats that are more competitive? But again, it's in nobody's interest to do that.
Yeah. Because
nobody wants to work as hard as those of us in swing seats have to work. But it actually makes a better product. It actually sends people up here that are willing to solve problems. And I also think that starting with my class, of those of us that won in 14, and I would say the last two, it's a lot of the folks that came in on both sides of the party are like you and I. We had careers. We weren't career politicians, so we have a bias towards action. And the people that we work with, right, are people similar to us that also have that bias. And so I think once some of the newer members start getting into leadership positions, you may start seeing this because the way we came up here was different.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a positive pressure on this institution.
Would term limits further accelerate that pressure, or how do you feel about it?
So as someone who has to have a knife fight every 2 years, I do believe that it already exists. And the question, the philosophical question I would propose is, does the caliber of the games in the NBA get better if you force LeBron James to leave after 10 years or Tim Duncan to leave after 10 years, right? Does the caliber get better? And ultimately, I think these are decisions that folks on the ground should make. And I would add, well, people say, well, not enough people vote. Well, that means because we're not giving them a product they want to come out and vote for. I was on a panel at South by Southwest with a bunch of YouTube stars. Combined,
YouTubers.
Yeah, combined, they literally had 1 billion
Oh my gosh.
viewers, right, on their collective pages. And one was the digital director for The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. And this was right when the movie Moana was coming out, the cartoon. And she said, if Moana comes out and fails at the box office, are we going to blame the moviegoers, or are we going to say it's a crummy movie, right? Now, I think Moana was a fantastic, delightful movie. There's no editorial, opinion on the movie. But she said, only in politics, when people don't come out to vote, we blame voters, rather than saying we didn't provide the
Interesting. I should disclose that for about a year, I was only following 3 people on Instagram, one of which was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the other was the Pope, and the third was Aaron Rodgers. So The Rock has an insanely motivating Instagram feed where he's just posting pictures of himself lifting like 400 pounds.
And he'll be on a flight to Tokyo, a 15-hour flight to Tokyo, and the first thing he does is go, throw around some weight. I'm like, I feel bad when I, get off a Southwest Airlines flight. It's only like 8 o'clock. I'm like, I could probably go do something.
Who's the coolest person you've ever met as a member of Congress, besides me, obviously?
The coolest person that I've ever, there was, so this is so wonky. The one guy that I was really excited to meet was Neil Howe. He wrote the book Generations. This was the foundational book that the phrase millennial came from. And
wow.
And so I had read that when I was in high school. And I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna meet this guy. I got to meet Morgan Freeman.
That's cool.
That's pretty cool. And then I also got to meet, why am I drawing a blank on her name? From Wedding Crashers, the Owen Wilson.
Rachel McAdams.
Okay, yeah.
I got to meet Rachel McAdams.
I got a $1 billion idea for you when you leave Congress involving Morgan Freeman.
Okay.
Just have an app where Morgan Freeman narrates your life. You can wake up and Morgan Freeman will be like, my God, I got out of bed today. So that's just, you can have that for free.
I appreciate that.
Okay, so quickly, back to congressional dysfunction, or whatever we're calling it. What about the schedule itself? We're in this crazy process where I spent half my life trapped in O'Hare on missing connecting flights. We fly in on a Monday night, we leave on a Thursday morning. It's pretty chaotic. People have to spend a lot of time fundraising. Are there ways where the schedule could be more productive?
So, again, I think everybody has a different experience up here, but someone who, I have to be in the district. I have to be talking to people, communicating with people, right? And getting, talking about what I'm doing, but also getting feedback from folks back home. I get the difficulty of going back and forth, but I think that time in our district is valuable. Because I think one of the things that happens is we get caught up in this beltway thinking, and when you go home, people just don't care about that. Right? And it's funny, I would always call my campaign manager, and we're wringing our hands up here in D.C. on some particular issue. And he's like, what are you talking about? Nobody cares, right? And so being back in the district to have your finger on the pulse, I think is important. And so this roughly 3 weeks up here, 1 week full back in the district, 3 nights in DC, weekends. I fly in and out of San Antonio 2 weekends a month, Midland 1 weekend, and El Paso 1 weekend, and hit those parts in my district. And so 3 major airports service my district. It takes 2.5 hours to drive across mine at 80 miles an hour, which is the speed limit in most of the district.
And then Beta's driving, is that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I learned 2 weeks ago that I'm speed limit in all of the district. So I can say, hey, you can compress things a little bit more. There's a lot of, we talked about this before, there's a lot of kabuki theater to what's going on here, where you already know in advance of what's going to happen, right? And so there's nothing unique that so removing some of that, I think there's ways to make this place.
But that's also, to get to your original point, that's a response to incentives, right? Like people know if they participate in that theater, they may not be able to sort of accumulate power within the institution, but they can build a power base in the conservative industrial complex, the media complex, or the mirror image of that on the left side. Talk to me a little bit about the demands of fundraising and correspondingly the demands of being on social media, on all types of media, and how you navigated that.
Sure. So I look at fundraising. My dad, when he retired, I think he was making $60,000, right? And so he supported 3 kids on that. And my mom worked a little bit here and there. So I don't come from money. I was able to save enough through my careers that, buy a home and, put some of my own money into a campaign a little bit amount. I always think you should be your biggest donor, right?
Yeah.
And so, but if it wasn't for the ability to raise money, I wouldn't be in Congress, right? And so I look at it as something that has to happen. If you want to crack heads up here, you got to be able to raise money. And
you got to be able to tell your story, right?
Absolutely.
And it costs money to do that on TV.
Absolutely. And look, I think a lot of times the people, when what I call the professional political class, these are the people that do TV ads and pollsters. The fact that these folks are like multi-millionaires is an indication of who's making the most money, right? One of the local TV stations in San Antonio, I literally fund their entire budget for a year based on what my spend on that channel is in an election, right? So my last election was a $35 million raise. That's both sides combined at Super PAC.
$35 million.
$35 million, right? It's crazy.
My first was $3 million, and that was expensive for Wisconsin.
Yeah. So it happens. So you got to do it in order to make sure you're able to represent people and bring your ideas up here. Social media, the way I do it, it's a vehicle to be able to communicate with your constituents and get feedback from them. And so I'm glad I have that tool because it's something that I get to control. I get to use that as a message, and having a good team to do that. And then when it comes to the media, again, I'm going to talk about the things I want to talk about, right? That I'm working on. So when I first got to Congress, Barack Obama was in office. So everybody wanted me to be the black Republican criticizing the black president. Now,
you're the only black Republican right now.
Right
Congress,
now, in the House. Yeah. So Tim Scott, you have in the Senate. And then now, as I'm leaving, everybody wants me to be the Republican congressman to criticize the Republican president. And my philosophy is simple. I agree when I agree. I disagree when I disagree. And so I don't feel any pressure. I probably turn down more stuff than I turn down significantly more. My comms director's over there laughing because she's like, yeah, he's turned down a lot of stuff. Just part of it because I'm going to focus on those things and I can focus on because my bandwidth is limited.
It has, as someone who's similarly tried to take a policy versus just a personality approach, although with a far less significant profile than you, it did take me a while to realize that a lot of times the media is only interested in talking to me if they can sort of stoke some kind of Republican on Republican violence. In other words, I'll get completely ignored when I leave the House floor for 95% of the time, except that they think I'm going to vote against the president, which is an odd dynamic. Have you felt?
Oh, for sure. Look, if you say nobody has ever clicked on the article that says Congress worked, right? Nobody's clicked on that. It's always like some dysfunction or something crazy. And look, if you say something crazy, you're going to get 10x the number of reach, especially through social media. So it's that, again, we talk about incentive structures, right? The way social media and the way the traditional media is focusing now, everyone's trying to chase clicks, right? And so for me, character matters, not clicks, right? And that also takes discipline, because when you see those metrics and others are going through the roof, it can be frustrating. But I think being thoughtful, being honest, this is why I came here, and that's what I'm going to stick to. But it's not easy. It's not easy to have a discipline to not chase those kinds of things.
And it's also got to be interesting as a human guy, right? So a lot of what you do as a human collector is you're assessing the reliability of your sources, right? And oftentimes I'll read these articles, and the headline is so provocative. I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, the CrowdStrike server is in, San Antonio, but then I start to look at the sourcing, and it's like, okay, one anonymous source who doesn't have direct placement and access, the business model is changing, and it's not like a bias so much as it is just laziness and a response to that clickbait incentive.
Well, look, 100%, and I think this is such a fascinating topic that we should get into more, because in the intelligence business, you have the information, you have the person giving the information, you have that person's access to the information, and then you have things that you already may know about that particular topic. And so just because one person had access and was able to talk with an authoritarian manner on X topic doesn't mean he or she knows anything about Y, right? And so sometimes you see the press doing that, or a administration official. What does that mean? That could be like 90,000 people, and you're acting like you're getting it straight from the president, right? And so it's a I don't know if it's ignorance. I don't know if it because I would think that in traditional media they go through some course talking about what's an accurate source, right? You should be able to confirm information. And you deal with things that, for me, and like I said, this, as a professional intelligence officer, I question everything. And it's important to get a perspective from all different walks of life, not just a sole source that may or may not have good access to that piece of information.
There's so many times when I read an article, I'm like, I would have not been able to write, we used to call it DIRS, a draft intelligence information report, based on the sourcing, let alone publish it on the front page of the New York Times. It creates an enormous amount of disinformation. Then a tweet based on that article itself becomes a separate story. It kind of becomes this weird, what we in the military call self-licking ice cream cone. Yeah. It's hard. I mean, if you're just trying to think for yourself and figure out what's true and what isn't, even as a member of Congress, it can be incredibly difficult. So you kind of mentioned how in the current environment, if you want to do I disagree with Trump on this, but I agree with him on this, I want to work with him on this, it can be very difficult because it seems like you're either 100% with them or against them. Do you think that's a reflection of this broader trend, which gets to the sort of dysfunction of Congress, where Article 2, the executive branch, has become so powerful as Article 1 has become less powerful in our system?
For sure. And Article 2 has gotten more powerful because Article 1 gave them more power, right? This is historically, Congress has given up much of its authority to the executive branch. And I believe part of it is out of sheer laziness, right? And then when you go back and look from a political angle, when a president is more popular in somebody's district than that person who's been representing that district for 20 years, right? The reason I've been successful is I have an independent relationship with those voters in my district. They've seen me. They know me. They've been on a telephone town hall with me. They've done an in-person town hall at Dairy Queen. I do this thing called DC to DQ, where I go to all the Dairy Queens and do town halls. They've chatted me up at the gas station, right? And so I have a personal relationship. And so when there are members of Congress where the president is more popular in their districts than they are, right? And then you add on top of that, giving away the actual constitutional authority through legislation, you weaken what is supposed to be a co-equal branch of government.
So we have less than 5 minutes. I want to ask 3 final questions.
Gotcha. This is lightning round or just like?
It's not a lightning
Okay,
round,
gotcha.
but it's.
You were setting it up like
I could. We could do that.
Do you do a lightning round?
We should. This
Okay.
is the second one I've done. I don't know. It depends on how fast we get through it. Okay, so what advice would you give to whoever occupies your seat in the next Congress?
Care about people, right? Your title is representative. You don't represent the people that just voted for you. You represent everybody. And when you think that way, you're going to have a bigger impact on community. Because ultimately, the thing that I've learned representing truly a 50/50 district way more unites us than divides us. And when you focus on those things that unite us, you can be even more effective.
Okay, let's say you walk into a bar in San Antonio, Texas, or Green Bay, Wisconsin, and you meet why would a kid be in a bar? Well, let's say there's a kid with his family there at a restaurant eating tacos, breakfast tacos, which I hear you're a big fan of.
Yeah.
And they're interested in a career in service, both in the national security community or in politics. What advice would you give them?
I would say being a case officer in the CIA is the best job on the planet. And the way to do that is learn another language, work abroad when you're in college in another language, and have good grades. Right? That was something, being able to, I when I was in Pakistan, Afghanistan, I went to the Khyber Pass. Right? Khyber Pass is this fabled, mountain pass in South Asia. Alexander the Great went through it. Genghis Khan went through it. Marco Polo went through it. The Italian explorer, not the game you play in the pool. And I've been through it. Right? It's just crazy.
Awesome.
It's just crazy, like being connected in a very small way to something like that, and to be able to have worked on the most important national security issues of the day in dangerous environments, it was pretty cool. So, and I would also tell that to young women, right? Because we always hear about James Bond, but Jamie Bond is way cooler. And in my career, I found that the female officers were so much better.
Right.
And it's a career that women don't think of, but it's a career that they're incredibly effective in.
Who should be the next James Bond, by the way? Strong thoughts on that?
All this talk about Idris Elba, was interesting, but I think that may blow people's mind. If depending on how long you're in Congress, Mike Gallagher, you could potentially pull us off. You're good. You ask good questions. I don't know how you are.
I'm a huge Idris Elba advocate for the next James Bond, and I will boycott if he is not the next James Bond. Has there ever been a movie or a TV show about the CIA that you could watch without gagging constantly because of how unrealistic it was?
Argo. This is
Interesting.
Ben Affleck's Argo. And this was a historical perspective after when our embassy got taken over in Iran, and it's like 98% accurate. It's actually the operation is a case study that we use in CIA training, and so it's a pretty good accurate perspective. So that's one that I usually go to. And then there's some funny parts, and I shouldn't say this, everybody gets mad when I say it, but Burn After Eating with Brad.
Oh, yeah.
There's some parts where they're like, okay, what's the situation report? And someone's giving this long report, and the senior guy's like, so nothing's changed. He's like, exactly. It's like, there's little parts like that are super fun. And John Malkovich is awesome.
Are any of these books that have come out? Who's the New York Times guy or the Washington Post guy who's written like Body of Lies?
Oh yeah.
I had breakfast with him.
He's great.
Do you have?
I hope you edit this part out.
Yeah,
because,
for sure.
Because
we have that technology.
David Ignatius.
Yes.
David Ignatius. David Ignatius is great. And look, I was actually when he wrote, I think it was his second to last or third to last book, that was around cybersecurity. This was when I was in the business, and we connected, and I helped connect him with some of the people that took him out to Black Hat, which is a hacking conference, and was, helped him do some of his research for his book.
Do you read fiction?
I do. So it's funny, I didn't really start reading fiction until 2007 when I was in Afghanistan, and it was a great way to just kind of like switch off because, you're pulling 16, 17-hour days. And so I do a mix of fiction, history, and biographies. And I've started going back and reading old sci-fi. I recently read I, Robot. This is Isaac Asimov, written 70 years ago. Now, if you've seen the movie and you go read the book, there's not the Will Smith character in the movie. It's two very different things.
I saw that movie in Spain, and it was Yo, Robots.
So I, Robot has been, it really has predicted some of the current challenges you have in artificial intelligence right now. And so it's been fascinating going back through and reading that. But I read a lot of fiction. I love movies. I watch some of the movies. I watch bad movies.
Flights a lot as a member of Congress. I can't do work on flights. It's very hard.
8 to 5, I try to do work.
Yeah.
After that, I'll watch. I'll be watching The Mandalorian on the fly back.
Oh, all in on The Mandalorian.
I haven't watched the latest episode, so don't tell me.
My wife's all in on it too, which is great. I mean, it's Baby Yoda is taking over the world. So what's next for Will Hurd?
So it's hard because I have 12 months left here, and you really can't finalize anything until you're out of Congress. But I'll be doing something in media where, kind of think like streaming show talking about technology and national security. I'll do something in the private sector. I'll probably sit on some boards. Also do something in academia where helping to kind of build an institute on technology and policy. And then politically, I'm going to stay involved because I think if the Republican Party doesn't start looking like America and appealing to all Americans, there won't be a Republican Party in America. And the way you do that is make sure you have good candidates win in primaries. And so I know how to win tough primaries. So to be able to go and help really great candidates, people that you and I would want to serve with, is something I'm looking forward to doing as well.
Well, I have no doubt that this will be the first of many successful chapters of your service to this country. This is probably the second big chapter. And I would just say, as someone who's in his second term, who spent a lot of time in his first term trying to figure out how this place worked, one of the things you have to do is figure out who you reach out to, who you trust, who you respect for advice and mentorship. And you have absolutely been that person. You've been extraordinarily generous with your time. And whenever I ask you a dumb question on the House floor. And so while I'm very, very sad to see you leave Congress, I have enormous gratitude for your service here, and I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Well, you're one of the exciting people in this place. And I'll be honest, I was suspicious about this podcast at first. But it really has been a delightful time, and I think your thoughtfulness and some of the questions are great. And I'm glad that there's someone like you that's here, and your friendship has been something that I'm not dying, so we're gonna do this.
I'm gonna hold a wake for you, anyways, just for the heck of it. But.
It was funny when I made the announcement. A lot of people did ask, like, "Are you sick?" No. But no, thanks for having me on, man, and thanks for what you do.
Awesome, thank you all.
The dude about, yeah. The dude about. The dude about, yeah. The dude about.